Welcome, everyone. I'm Scott Nash. I'm the Executive Director of Illustration Institute, a nonprofit 501c3 dedicated to the proposition that all arts are created equal, especially illustration. Our mission is to increase appreciation and awareness of illustration, an art form that enriches our lives every day. We do this because we truly love illustration and what we call the narrative arts: prose, poetry, songwriting, cartooning, animation, gaming, and categories that we likely have yet to define. Illustration Institute offers workshops, talks, exhibitions, and an artist residency on the site of a former Bohemian enclave established in 1919 on Peaks Island. Illustration has an ancestral home here in Maine, attracting such luminaries to its shores as Dolph Ipcar, Ashley Bryant, Robert McCluskey, N.C. Wyeth, Barbara Cooney, and many others scattered throughout the state presently, and in this room sitting here tonight. In Maine parlance, Illustration Institute is endeavoring to establish nothing less than a haystack, hewn oaks, and Monhegan for illustrators and narrative artists. If you agree with this vision, we'd ask you to please support us by making a donation either to our website, illustrationinstitute.org, or by stopping by the table just outside the hall where you can experience the more tangible joy of our smiles as we accept your donations. I would also like to mention that we will be making available for purchase copies of Mark Ulrichson's book, Dogs Rule Nonchalantly. This man is a dog person. We know that from this book. Mark will very likely sign them for you following the presentation. 3 more notes before I introduce Mark. Nancy said I talk a bit too much before the presentations. We did a little, I did a sort of coming attraction slideshow for you to sort of show you some of the artists that are coming. You can, of course, go to the website and see the artists. We have quite a lineup this summer. Our current exhibition is The Art of Cute at the Brickstore Museum. Please go see it. It's an inspiring and provocative exhibition that will no doubt change your view regarding this powerful and misunderstood aesthetic. I think you'll be amazed at the range of artistic expression inspired by cute. You will discover works that are adorable, witty, poignant, creepy, profoundly creepy, truthful, joyful, and disturbing. I also want to say that we have none other than Katie Yamasaki, not only in residence, but here tonight. Katie's sitting right over there. And I have to confess to being a bit in awe of Katie, who's not only an amazing children's book author and illustrator, but an extraordinary muralist. And Katie, as somebody who's afraid of heights, I want to learn how you've got around to doing this. It's amazing to see what you've done. I believe Katie has created somewhere in the range of 80 large-scale murals, many of them gracing the sides of very large buildings, some of which were shown in our preview. Katie will be giving a talk, an II talk at the Peaks Island Library this Wednesday night from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30. Please come. Folks from Portland, we'd love to see you there. It's an easy boat trip. We tried to schedule it around the ferries as well. Lastly, the brilliant illustrator Ellen Weinstein will be here giving a talk at an II talk at the Maine College of Arts Osher Hall on Wednesday, July 10th, next week. And that will be from 5:30 to 7 p.m. These talks and others are listed at our website, illustrationinstitute.org. Now, to tonight's speaker. Mark Ulrichson hails from San Francisco, but also spent a significant amount of time in Boston, where many of us became acquainted with this wildly talented designer, painter, and illustrator. I met Mark in the late 80s when he was working with my friends at Northeastern University. I remember him as being one of the most intensely enthusiastic individuals I'd ever met. He was, and will ever remain, an infectiously inspiring person. Mark, it's all right. Mark is an illustrator whose instantly recognizable portrait, sorry, go back here, sorry. We're there? Okay. And whimsical take on life had led to projects for a variety of impressive clients, including The New Yorker, Time, Newsweek, Business Week, The Atlantic, Rolling Stone, Esquire, and GQ. His paintings are in the collections of the National Portrait Gallery, Smithsonian Institution, and the Library of Congress. Of course, Mark is best known for his work in The New Yorker, for the covers in The New Yorker, where he's been a regular contributor since 1993 with more than 60 magazine covers to his credit. Mark's varied interests are often subjects of his acrylic or gouache paintings, be they politics or dogs, people or sports. He's covered the 2008 Masters and the 2015 British Open for Golf Digest, and has created murals for United Airlines and the Chicago Bears that grace the walls of United Club at Soldier Field. He has been the regular illustrator for the San Francisco Jazz Festival, and he is the recipient of numerous awards, including gold and silver medals from the New York Society of Illustrators. Please join me in welcoming our friend, Mark Ulrichsen.
Thanks, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here, and haven't discovered Portland enough yet, but we're sold on Peaks Island. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I went from being a graphic designer to a self-taught illustrator, and then what it's like to work for The New Yorker. And there'll be a little brief segue in between where I'll show you some stuff from that dog book that's here. So I'll start with showing you our little 1897 Victorian, that brick building in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury. Here's my neighborhood. We're down in the lower quadrant. This is my desk at work in a little 135-foot studio. I love visual clutter, but I'm a very organized person. That's just my nature. But when I'm trying to come up with ideas, my desk looks more like this. One of the hardest things being self-employed is finding good help. You know, people fall asleep on the job, or they're making a mess. So prior to being an illustrator, like I said, I was a graphic designer, and I worked at Northeastern in 1983 and 84, and actually 3 of my coworkers are here, which is a wonderful treat since it's been 36 years. When I left Boston, I moved to San Francisco, and I worked as an associate art director and then the art director of this public television station magazine, San Francisco Focus, which is like Boston Magazine or New York Magazine. As associate art director, I loved my job. As the art director, I hated my job because I'm not a manager or an administrative type. I just like being creative. One of the great joys when I worked there was working with illustrators like Jamie Hogan from Peaks Island. Yay! Or Anthony Russo from Rhode Island. Or Matt Mahurin painting Alcatraz Island. So when I decided to be an illustrator, I got some great advice from a mentor and coworker I had at Northeastern, Pamela Geddes, who told me if I wanted to be an artist, then I would have to know myself inside and out. I would have to keep a journal, write down my dreams, try to figure out what they meant, figure out what my fears were and why, what my loves were and why, and then have it all come out in my art. And I just said, okay, forget that. But actually, I am a little self-introspective, and I do keep a journal, and I tell people my dreams, and they roll their eyes. But one thing I had to learn was, okay, where does my inspiration come from? And I thought, well, the main source of my inspiration are the movies. And in the movies, I can see a lot of the principles that I was taught as a graphic designer, like playing with scale, where a person can be small in relationship to bigger forces, or larger than life, Or you can use dramatic points of view to tell a story, whether you're making someone look heroic or diminished. And this is from my favorite film, The Third Man. I always want to plug that. One thing that I think most of us love, and especially graphic designers, are patterns. And like this scene, I don't even know what the movie is, but I just was mesmerized when I saw this shot. The woman has a patterned dress, a patterned fan. The guy in the background has a patterned shirt. There's patterns on the bottle of liquor. There's patterns on Toshiro Mifune's tie and his shirt. And I'm just always interested in patterns, as in The Naked City, or in a Hitchcock film. And I also love deadpan humor. I like British humor. I love cropping images. This is from High Noon. And when I studied graphic design, we were taught about looking at negative spaces, all the spaces in between the figures. And I often crop faces off to make things more dramatic. Or how do you tell a story with putting people in an environment? Another thing that inspires me is photography. As an art director, we work primarily with photography as opposed to illustration. I like whimsy and goofiness. I like telephoto lenses and looking through binoculars and making things more dramatic than they actually are. I like stories that are told by what hands are doing. Or stories that are told with what eyes are doing. I like repeated patterns. And again, look at the negative space around that person, all around the faces. Again, repeated patterns. Or I like, how do you organize a bunch of people into one image, like all the heads lined up with Sinatra there? Or I like photos that show a foreground, a midground, and a background in my home city. Or the paradox of the Stanley Kubrick photo where you're simultaneously looking up and down. And I also like suspended animation and dramatic shadows. So you'll find these things a lot in my paintings. I also love ephemera because what I do is very ephemeral. So I love old circus posters and folk art and America's Leader and graphic design. So here, New York is the Big Apple and LA are the palm trees. I also love baseball cards, and I love playing warm colors off of cool colors, and I like names like Clyde Klutz. But probably the two inspirations for my work are what I grew up with, loving, this magazine and this Saturday morning cartoon. One thing I learned working as an art director is how photographers work. So for instance, in this contact sheet that Arnold Newman took of Igor Stravinsky, he's using a large format for those images, so he's having to crop within the camera when he shoots. And then he goes through and he looks at his images and he puts a check next to the ones he likes. And if he likes it even more, he puts 2 checks. And then if you look in the lower right, he takes the photo that he already cropped in the camera and then recrops it yet again to come up with this. So it taught me keep looking, and keep refining. When I was a graphic designer, one of the reasons that I wanted to switch my job was, or when I was an art director, was not only did I not like being a boss, but I had a dream about kerning pairs. And if anybody knows typography, that's how you adjust letters between each other. And I thought, I don't want to dream about kerning pairs. So once I became an illustrator, I went out on my own when I was 37 years old. I got to look at art books, and I found that artists tell stories with what eyes and hands are doing. Or they create unique compositions that they then repeat by flopping the image, and it's the same composition. That's Poussin. So, the New Yorker is my biggest client, and I will talk about my process of working with them. So one of the first things I did when I tried to get work was I sent out samples. I would go to newsstands and find the names of all the people in the art departments of magazines because I wanted to work for magazines, and I would send them samples. But the problem with the New Yorker is they don't have a staff box listed, so you don't know who to send your samples to. And so as an art director, I'd often work with illustrators who would come in and I'd say, let me show you my illustrations. And someone once said, you should send it to the New Yorker. And it's like, and to whom? And I got a name finally. And so this was one of my first promos that I did. And having been on the design side of things, I like small things that can say a lot. So this is an accordion fold booklet that I made. And the first 3 pieces, the cover and the first 2, were personal pieces that I was doing while I was trying to learn how to be an illustrator. And the other 3 were some of my first assignments. And with the New Yorker, this was my very first job. And they call this GOAT, Goings On About Town. And I think a lot of illustrators get started by doing stuff in the calendar section. So that's what happened with me. I did a lot of stuff in the calendar section. And then one day I got a call from the art editor, Françoise Mouly, and she was new to the magazine. And also timing and luck play an important part of anybody's career. And I just happened to have the good fortune of getting good enough to submit work to the New Yorker when they got a new editor, Tina Brown, in 1993, and a new art editor, Françoise Mouly, whose husband is Art Spiegelman, who you may know of for Mouse and various things. And so Françoise called up once and said, the New Yorker is talking about having like a standalone page, like an artist sketchbook page, so we would like you to submit ideas for this. And you don't get paid for submitting ideas, but it's the New Yorker, so of course I'm going to do it. So I thought, okay, the world's my oyster. What do I want to submit to the New Yorker? Since I can do anything, which is kind of hard. You want to narrow things down. So I thought, okay, well, I love baseball, and I hate certain owners. So I'll do baseball cards of the owners I hate. And I think because of that, they liked my snarkiness, and so that led to more jobs. Another thing about working for the New Yorker is you have to be very fast. It's a weekly, and I think this sums it up the best. I once got a call. Tina Brown is going out of town, but she really wants to do a standalone page about a new movie that's coming out, and it stars John Travolta, Danny DeVito, Gene Hackman, Rene Russo. It takes place at an airport terminal where there's a lot of lockers, people have guns, and it's called Get Shorty, and we need a sketch in 15 minutes. So this is what 15 minutes buys you. And then this is the finished painting. So, like I say about luck and timing, I did have a big break with the New Yorker. Unfortunately, it occurred when I was still working full-time as art director at San Francisco Focus. There was a trial happening in San Francisco where Janet Malcolm, a writer for the New Yorker, was being sued by a person she portrayed, Jeffrey Mason. So they asked me to go to this trial because it was taking place in San Francisco, and they said, we'll give you 6 full pages, do whatever you want, be a journalist illustrator, which was a tremendous and terrifying prospect. And lo and behold, it never ran. But because of this, the next year they said, we'd like to consider you doing a cover, and we have a story about Hillary Clinton. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the New Yorker's covers have nothing to do with the inside stories. They're standalone, but in this case, they said, we want a cover about Hillary, and this was my first cover, and they dictated it. They said, Francoise, whose friend said that Hillary will wear the White House obfuscating her face. And then with Bill and Chelsea. And the New Yorker, they're fastidious with their fact-checking. They even fact-checked the art, and they came back to me and said, Hillary's eyes align. But that's an artistic license. So as far as working on the inside of this story, they said, okay, well, we have an idea, and a lot of times with them, you might be discussing what you're going to do over the phone and coming up with a solution, talking to Francoise. And she said, Hillary changes her hairstyle all the time. This is in '94. And she said, so we had this notion of, how paper dolls have wigs and stuff with little tabs and cutout lines? So what if you did all her different hairstyles with little cutout lines? And I just thought, this is an idea from the New Yorker? But you can't tell them that. So fortunately, in my head, I just said, well, what if instead of that, we had busts of Hillary that would turn from right to left, and as it turns, her hair changes and she ages. And so that became the opener instead of that. And then from then on, they said, okay, here's a new idea. We want to show the Rose Law Firm, or we want to show Bill's lost his re-election bid to be governor of Arkansas a second time, and Hillary's trying to prop him up, but she can't show him enough emotion. So those two illustrations. And you can tell it was governor because his hair wasn't white yet. They'd say, okay, we have a new idea for a story, or an illustration within this. Hillary's working behind the scenes with this guy, Ira Magaziner, to design healthcare with 500 people working together, and it's behind closed doors, and they don't want anybody to know. And I thought I was done with this project. It went on for 2 weeks. Eventually, I did 17 illustrations for this one story. They said, okay, there's a press conference, because Hillary was getting in trouble with Whitewater at the time. And they said, there's a press conference today, watch it, and then turn in an illustration in 2 days. So that was this one. So there's Helen Thomas and Britt Hume, and I just made up everybody else. And then I thought I was done, and they said, no, the State of the Union address is coming up. Watch it and do something with Hillary as the main figure, but we need it in a day. So I said, can I just do it in black and white? And they said, okay. So I did this pencil drawing, and I thought, oh, I'm done. And they said, we don't like this. They killed it, and they said, okay, now we want to have a different scene where Hillary is helping Bill, or Bill is helping Hillary because of her trouble by reading a passage in the Bible. This was another one-day pencil drawing. So I'm telling my wife, Leslie, go through my scrap file of people sitting and find someone sitting facing left. And so she found the reference photo. Being the New Yorker, I knew to ask, okay, if it's a passage in the Bible, where in the Bible is it? The beginning, the middle, or the end? Because the New Yorker readers will complain if I don't get it right. So this helped me become a kind of a regular with the New Yorker. And from there, it led me to doing a lot of portraits, which I really enjoy doing. So they asked me to do a book review on Julia Child. So I thought, okay, what would she have in chicken soup? Or if Martin Scorsese was putting on a film festival in New York. And so when it had Citizen Kane, this is one of the seminal images of Citizen Kane, so I thought, perfect, I'll just have the black and white and the color, and Scorsese can kind of echo Orson Welles. And I would do portraits of musicians, like Los Lobos, or there was once a story on Tupac Shakur, and they said, okay, Tupac is very vulnerable, so do a portrait of him looking vulnerable. And I love this composition because basically he's framed by these two little quadrants on left and right. One is the bend of the brick wall, and the other is my way of just indicating Los Angeles with palm trees. And I can match the color of his underwear with the sky. And I was really happy with this, and they said, we're going to kill it. Because Tupac is not vulnerable. Tupac is living the life. He's got the babes and the bodyguard and the bling. And so that became the lead illustration. And one thing that the New Yorker did back in the day, more when Tina Brown was in charge, because she's more visual than David Remnick, the current editor, is have these stories with multiple illustrations. So we want to see Tupac with Biggie Smalls. And so I likened it to The Godfather. And I had a cat in there in the lower left because I figured, all these Godfather types have a cat. And the author of the story didn't like it, so they killed the cat. And then here's a portrait of Snoop Dogg, as well as part of the series. Years later, I did one on the 2008 market crash, and that's Hank Paulson, Ben Bernanke, and Tim Geithner. And then inside, here was a scene, and I thought, in my mind, Paulson's saying, this is how big the problem is, and Bush is saying, no, I thought it was this big. So that's what their hands are doing. Or showing, what really happens to people who lose their jobs, the pain of that. I did portraits of Obama or the Pope on a story where the Pope wanted Catholics to be as fervent in their religion as Muslims are, so they're very subtle on the bottom. Or a portrait of this guy, Bob O'Neill, who was with the FBI, who warned on September 10th, 2001 that Al-Qaeda was ready to attack, and the next day he died. And so the Twin Towers are looming low on the right there. I want it to be a secondary read. Because one thing you learn in graphic design is there's a hierarchy of where you want people to understand what you're doing. This is most important, this is second, this is third. Or there's a story on Ramparts, the bad cops in LA. So here's a cop flashing gang signs. Or a story by Hilton Alls, a memoir of his troubled aunt growing up in maybe Bed-Stuy, who was very charismatic but also a drug addict. And sometimes I do small things like a theater review. This was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Or movie reviews. So this is Margin Call. Ironically, this painting, I had about 4 different people asked to buy it, starting with the director of the movie. And eventually I sold it to somebody, I don't even know who. The thing about the movie reviews, when I used to do them, they would send out, there was a company, this is all before Google, a photo clipping company in New York, and they would send you a packet of, 5 images of Kevin Spacey and 6 of Jeremy Irons, and that's how you would get your reference. Later, working with the New Yorker, they would send you a link to a trailer, and they'd say, watch the trailer and illustrate it. And so you would have to watch a trailer over and over and over and try to figure out, okay, who's the main character? What's this about? So this is The Pianist with Adrian Brody. Sometimes they're even in black and white. So this is just a pencil drawing of Vicky Cristina Barcelona. And again, just looking at the trailer and saying, okay, this is the couple, but they're wrong. This is the woman who's wrong, Penelope Cruz, what have you. So where do ideas come from? Well, for me, when I did my second New Yorker cover, they said, submit ideas for covers after I did Hillary. So I thought, okay, New York. What do I like about New York? I love water towers. So for a summer cover, here's kids jumping into a water tower. And then I ran out of ideas about New York, so it's like, okay, I don't have to have it just be about New York, because one of the great things Francoise told me was, look at your own life. And so I thought, okay, when we travel, my wife's a photographer, she takes a picture of something, I take a picture of her taking a picture of it. Or when you're a tourist, you might be photographing a bull without realizing it's the running of the bulls right behind you. Again, in studying art, this is one of my favorite paintings by Manet, Luncheon on the Grass. And in studying this, I learned that Manet looked to the past for his inspiration. So that's where that weird trio came from. So I thought, well, if Manet can do it. So this is for Memorial Day. If you're stuck in traffic, pull over and have a picnic. My daughter, once for her birthday, got a kaleidoscope. And I was looking through it in my studio and seeing all the crazy patterns. And I thought, I have to do something with patterns someday. And I had a poster assignment for Arena Stage for a play called The Women. And I thought, oh, here's a perfect way to do this pattern idea. The woman in the middle is the only one who doesn't know that her husband's having affairs. So all the other women are, eyeing each other with the innate gossip knowledge. And the women who are the two above her in the middle and the two below her, it's the same face. And I just changed the hair and changed the eyes. The two women on the center, on the sides, are the same face. And the rest are just one face. It's like a Greek chorus. So having done that, I thought, in the art world, you often riff on previous artists' work. And so Art Spiegelman had a notorious cover when there was riots in Crown Heights between black and Jewish citizens. And he had this couple kissing. And so about 6 years later or 5 years later, I thought, well, I can riff on that with my pattern idea and have patterns of politically incorrect kissing couples. But I kind of blew it because I have a Yankee fan kissing a Mets fan, and of course it should have been Yankees Red Sox. The only thing that the New Yorker didn't allow me to do, in my original painting, I had a priest kissing a nun. And they said, we're not going to go there. And if I had done it today, I'm sorry to say, I probably would have had a priest kissing a little boy, but I shouldn't go there either. So, cowboys and Indians, and I like that the Army, Navy is also two men. So I just thought of every kind of couple, doctor-patient, Arab-Jew. So that's one of my favorite covers I've ever done. I call it, with the covers, if you look on the table of contents, there's always a title. We artists get to submit our own title. Sometimes I have a list of titles, sometimes I have one title, and I'd say maybe 2/3 of the time I get my title. They name this Valentine's. One way I get ideas is looking at visuals, and I have this book called Bettman Archive, and prior to Google, Bettman Archive was one of the great sources for visuals. And so I would flip through the book and I'd say, summer, summer, winter, winter, whatever the subject was, trying to find something that would resonate with me. When I saw this one of the Milky Way, I thought, well, like New Yorkers consider themselves the center of the universe. And so looking here, it's all about looking. So here's this page of amusement parks. And so I'm looking through this. Is there a New Yorker idea in here? Is there a New Yorker idea? And then I saw in detail this one little photo, those upside-down roller coasters. And I'm sure some people like it, but I'm the guy in the upper left who's turning white and terrified. So that's my wife, Leslie, and my two kids behind her on this cover. Once I was visiting a school in Toronto, and I was a guest professor or a guest teacher for a week. And I gave the students assignment to do New Yorker covers. And one student said, I want to do something about Shakespeare. And I said, perfectly legitimate subject for the New Yorker. Okay, why would the New Yorker run Shakespeare on the cover? There's got to be a reason. It's probably not his birthday. It's not a new book he's coming out with. So I told her, in New York they have Shakespeare in the park. Why don't you do Shakespeare's in the park? And she said, no. And I went, oh, well, I just got a new idea. Now, normally, New Yorker, I've been to their office one time, and Francoise asked me, how come you work so big? It's like, well, how big do most people work? And most people's covers are yay big. And I have an eye disease that I got when I was 25. It's got a name this long, but basically I have blind spots, and my left eye is not very good. So I have to work big, and I wanted all the type on the newspaper to somehow relate to Shakespeare. So to paint that big, this is a 30 by 40 inch painting that they were not happy receiving. So now what I do is we have a printer that prints out on 19 by 13 inch sheets of paper. So when I do a drawing I like, I will then print it out, and I'll just take down all the meat of the drawing, so it's just kind of a little outline, and I'll print it on the watercolor paper, and I'll paint right on top of my drawing. So all my pieces now fit on 19 by 13. So with the New Yorker, there are seasonal subjects. I don't know how many people are considered regular contributors. I once counted like 35 people I thought you wouldn't be surprised seeing on the cover. And we get a calendar, and it lists what the New Yorker plans for the year, which might be special issues on tech or money or, innovators. And then it's just a list of things that we know are coming up, whether it's, the World Series, the Kentucky Derby, graduation, Mother's Day, etc. And then you work like 2 months out because you know that they're going to come up with a bunch of ideas. So, right now it's the start of July, so I might be thinking of things for September or October because they've probably got July and August covered. Unless something happens in the news, and then I'll wake up in the morning and all of a sudden there's, the South Carolina shooting. And I think I'm going to be painting a dog that day, and all of a sudden, no, I have to turn my attention to try to come up with something that's, about that doesn't offend, that makes sense, and that it's faster than Barry Blitt, because he's the best and the fastest. So for instance, when the first Winter Olympics happened after 9/11, I thought, okay, I bet security is going to be intense at the Olympics. And then when the movie Lincoln was coming out, and I love the movies, as you know, so I thought, okay, it's Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln. He's probably going to take all the awards, so I have his hat obfuscating all the other nominees, especially the males. It's going to go to Daniel Day-Lewis. Or I was thinking about graduation and somehow thinking of all the people in caps and gowns, and they all look the same, and then I started thinking about penguins, and they all look the same, and so I thought they could be like penguins, and this is called a drift. So like, you've been through all the school, now you're out, now what? Or just a summer idea, this could be Peaks Island. It's called Birds of a Feather. So, the birds are gossiping just like the people. And then I wanted the fence and the shadow to look like a fish, like the bones of a fish. And then, with the advent of the phone and how people are all distracted by their phones, I'm a semi-fan of phones. I thought, okay, I got to do something about this distraction with phones. And I thought, okay, when's a time when everybody's all together as a family? Oh, on vacation. So here everybody is getting their family photo taken. But life is full of distractions. So here's how I submit my work. Having worked there long enough, I can turn in a rough sketch. So this says, Orange Cat Surveys Orange Sky. And so the rough sketch got approved, and here's a tight sketch. And then all Francoise said is, I don't want to see that island of buildings in the background. Have it more flat, and here's the final cover. And so I'm going to take you through this cover here. In 96, Francoise called and said, we're thinking about doing something about, the upcoming election, and these guys are just dancing with each other. And it's like, well, what about a tango? And so, yes, let's do a tango. So the first sketch I did is, okay, I'll go with the, conniving Clinton and the surly Dole, which is what you expect. And I thought, well, maybe I need to have different expressions. What if I had a surprise Dole? Or what if I had him dejected, but then it looks like he stepped in something? What if I have him playful? Or what if I have Dole leading? And then I realized I don't even know how tall these guys are in relation to each other. So I went with this one, and this is the one they selected, but there was still something wrong with the balance in the cover, and so I moved Clinton's leg so it kind of matched more of Dole's leg, and that's the finished cover. So I have certain subjects that I turn to often, and these are two of my favorites. current events and crazy politics. So this was, I've done 2 covers on Martin Luther King. This is the first one. I just thought, in 1996, what would it be like if King were to see American cities today? And so the guy is pulling something out of the trash. I think it says, free at last, or I had a dream. That's with the woman in the background who's homeless. Some of the homeless people here are from my neighborhood in the Haight. And then recently, what will happen when I submit stuff is I'll give myself a day or 2 or 3, once a month or something, to just try to crank out ideas for the magazine. And I had done that, and I sent in like 6 or 7 ideas I liked, and I didn't hear a peep. And that's always kind of, And then I got an email from them. We're looking for something for Martin Luther King for last year. And I was like, oh, God, they just rejected everything. Do I want to start all over again? And I thought, okay, I had to take advantage of an opportunity. So I thought, okay, Martin Luther King. When I need to get an idea, I often take a shower. And in drought-stricken California, it's a short one. And I just thought, okay, King, what do I think of when I think of King? I can picture him in prayer. I could picture him on a knee in prayer. And then all of a sudden it's like, on a knee? Isn't that what Colin Kaepernick and the NFL players are doing? So I had King linking arms with these two. When I had the idea, I came down and told Leslie at breakfast, I've got this idea, the New Yorker wrote, and they want to see something, and she said, do it now. And I did like a 5-minute sketch, and this became the cover. And then I got a call a week later from Spike Lee, who ended up buying it. So that was exciting. There was a cover when McCain was running for president, and he didn't know how many houses he owned. And that became news. And Barry Blitt, who does most of the covers, is a buddy, and he called me up after he saw this. He said, did Francois tell you that I submitted an idea where he's playing Monopoly? And I said, no, but my idea with him playing Monopoly is he's dressed as Richie Rich, and on the Monopoly board, he's got all the money except one side has 5s and 10s, and one side has $2. And in the foreground, it's foreclosed housing and overturned cars and weeds. And he's got hotels on everything on the most expensive block except Pennsylvania Avenue. And in the background, Cindy McCain's bringing him even more houses. And then the staircase has the Budweiser logo, which is where Cindy McCain's money comes from, the Budweiser family. And so no one's going to see all these things, but I put them in there for my own enjoyment, and maybe somebody will. In 2006, I believe it was, Brokeback Mountain was, a landmark film for its subject matter, and Francois said, this is kind of an iconic image. Maybe we can riff on that. So it's like, okay, what can I do with Bush and Cheney as these guys? And at the time, news had just broke about NSA spying, so I thought, okay, I'll have them as spying, and there's an earbud in Bush's ear, and Cheney's got the binoculars, and there's a satellite dish on the Grand Tetons. And Francoise loved it. And this was like on a Friday, and she said, okay, David Remnick, who approves every comma, period, image, cartoon, you name it, he's out of town until Monday, so I'll show it to him on Monday. Lo and behold, over the weekend, our vice president went hunting with some buddies and shot somebody. So it became this. And this is I call this one Watch Your Back Mountain. And this is one of the covers. Back in the day, we'd use World Courier, and they would come to your house at 8 p.m. as opposed to FedEx, which was a 4:30 deadline for me in San Francisco. So this was a one-day painting. So you just coffee, chocolate, and loud music. So in the last election, when it was a lot of Republicans running for office, I thought, when you're in an elevator and no one talks to each other, no one looks at each other, I thought, what if all the candidates were in an elevator together? And they can't make eye contact or anything, and there's a female hand trying to get into the elevator. That would be Hillary. And Francois said, I love the idea, but no one's going to get this. What would be a better venue for this idea? And then she said, what about a locker room? And it's like, thank you, that's a great idea, because then I can make everybody individualized. So I'm going to go through this cover in particular to show you what's going on here. So this was the new sketch that got approved. So here's how I work. I told you I print stuff out onto the watercolor paper. I'm going to cover the entire surface with a sponge with, I think I worked in gouache on this one. So here I am. And there's also a collage Reagan up in the upper right. So once I've covered it up, I start to paint it in. Here's the final cover. Here's to show you what the grid looks like. So just to kind of show you how I'm trying to organize everybody so I got a lot of people, but it still isn't too convoluted, because I want your eye to move around kind of in a circle. So for everybody who's a Republican is wearing red in one way or another. So Chris Christie is the last guy to get dressed. Rand Paul is the most peeved. Marco Rubio is the most effeminate. Rick Perry's an empty pair of cowboy boots. Jeb Bush, who's a little more in the middle, is contemplating a purple tie or a red tie with blue stripes, but he's got his blue monogram JB underwear. Mike Huckabee's got a cross because he's reading the Bible. And Ted Cruz is the first one dressed, and he's got the Constitution and Reagan in his locker. And then the only blue in the cover is the woman who's locked out of the men's room, Hillary. So again, here's that cover. And this was called Suiting Up, and that was their title, which I love. So I like doing stuff about politics. When the White House or the Capitol was closed down or government was shut down around Halloween, it's okay, I can make it a haunted house, and that's the ghost of Ted Cruz and John Boehner and all the programs that weren't being enacted. But I got too carried away with that spider web, and I obfuscated my story on the tombstones. Or years later, when Congress to me was just a bunch of clowns and jokers and fools and charlatans, which my opinion hasn't changed. When they had the recent Olympics in South Korea, I thought, oh, here's a great chance for somebody to escape North Korea. And the way I work is the figures, just all the figures down below, the soldiers are all identical. I drew one figure full frame, probably the person on the right looking up that you see from head to toe, and I just flopped it for the people on the left, and so it's one figure done over and over. I finished this one about 15 minutes before FedEx, and I had to run to the FedEx store. This one ran last Halloween. I thought, okay, even the scariest costumes are afraid of this character. And this one's called Boo. And then recently for Brexit, I figured that was worthy of a cover. And this is another one of those one-day, or this is like a two-day cover. So a favorite subject of mine are dogs. I'm a big dog fan. So New Yorker covers, I've done dogs that have been super simple covers, or more busy covers, or seasonal covers. When I visit New York, I have a friend who lived in an apartment building, and I wonder, how do people have big dogs in New York? So if you get an idea you like, then it's like, okay, is that the best way to present that idea? Well, let me try other ways of presenting it. So I submitted all these, and Francois said, I like the kid, but they're too busy, simplify it. And that was the final cover. And that kid is now 22 years old. Or this was on the front page of the New York Times once about how various zip codes you can determine the predominant breed. And I thought, oh, this is a great chance to do a map or chart of New York via dogs. So, poodles come in from Brooklyn. The Statue of Liberty is a mutt. In the Village, it's pugs. In Wall Street, as well as the Bronx, it's pit bulls. And I have a cat slinking in from Jersey. Or here was my more recent one. The favorite email I got was, in my mind, in the upper right, it's a mother trying to help a skittish child dog down this slope, and she said, is that dog getting dog napped? It's like, no, don't worry. Or my own dog. So here's the dog book segue. Here's the dog book that is out there. And I'm just going to read what I said. So when I did this dog book, this was about 4 years ago, I've got over 100 dog paintings, and I thought no one's going to buy a book about the paintings of some illustrator that you may be familiar with but never heard of. Why don't I try to talk about why I love dogs and make it general and personal? So personally, I was never big on little dogs. And almost all these paintings are existed. So that was something from a gallery, as was this. And cats are a little too independent, too aloof to get close to. Despite their limited vocabulary, dogs are great communicators. They let you know when they're hungry, in need of affection or a bathroom. All a dog needs is a good stick. Long after the kids are grown and gone, it's nice to know there will always be a dog in my life. And there I put my dog cover there. as a friend. When our first dog, Ted, died, I cried for a week. So those are his tennis balls in heaven with him. Everything's better with a dog. So that's me and our second chocolate lab, Henry. We're now in our third chocolate lab, Ivy. Ultimately, dogs rule nonchalantly. Another favorite subject is baseball as well as other sports. So a portrait of Randy Johnson or Joe Torre. One of the things about working for the New Yorker is they do a lot of stories about the Yankees, and as a Red Sox fan, I hate the Yankees. But they're not going to do stuff about the Red Sox. So here was a story about George Steinbrenner inspecting the troops, or yucking it up with Yogi Berra after he made nice, or trying to console his troubled players Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden. And because of this, I thought, well, I can maybe see if the New Yorker will send me on a baseball junket. In 1999, a bunch of stadiums were closing. Tiger Stadium, Seattle Kingdom, Houston Astrodome, and my own Candlestick Park. And so I went to the New Yorker and I said, what if I acted as a journalist illustrator and went to these various stadiums and interviewed people, interviewed the fans, interviewed the concessionaires, how they felt about losing their stadium. And so this was great. You know, illustrators, it's pretty rare to have someone send you anywhere. So here I'm in the Houston Astrodome with a lot of the interviews I did. We finished up the trip. I had my cousin as my assistant, and we finished up the trip in San Francisco, and I have my reporter's notebook where I've been taking notes all the time and, you know, making sure I got people's names for, you know, releases to use their imagery. And it's like the sixth inning at this game in San Francisco, and all of a sudden I think of something and I want to write it down, and I can't find my reporter's notebook. And it's like, oh no, this whole project is doomed. And we retraced our steps, and I left it at some hot dog stand, and they had it and saved the day. So because of this, I also, when the Yankees were building a new stadium, I thought, what if there was an image of all the most seminal moments maybe at each position on the field? So you've got the 1900 stadium, the original house that Ruth built, and then in the 70s they did a horrific remodel, so in right field it's that way, and these are some of the key moments. I love doing research, working on a project like this. One time I would visit the New Yorker maybe every 3 years or 4 years, and I was there once, and Roger Angel, their great baseball writer, saw me and invited me in. He said, you know, you have this great new stadium in San Francisco. I'd love to do anything about it. Why don't you paint something and I'll write about it? So I got this press pass, and I envisioned this image of the stadium, and then I went to draw it, and I realized that it didn't comport to the dimensions of 2 pages in the magazine. So it's like, oh, I got all this extra space, what am I going to do? It's like, oh, perfect. This stadium is about being on the bay. So I can have the Bay Bridge, and I can have, you know, this is called McCovey Cove, and they used to have Chesapeake Bay retrievers jump in to get any balls that came out. And again, I like to throw in all kinds of details. So this is me and a friend cheering at the game, and these Mets fans are saying, why did they pitch the balls? I don't know. And then I have scores reflecting, you know, I wanted the Dodgers losing a bunch by the first inning, and in Colorado it's like 22-18 after 2 innings. So for baseball fans, that's all well known. This is my first baseball cover for the New Yorker, and at the time Roger Angel tore it apart. The ball would never be that small, it'd never be in that position, the bat would be tapered, the guy would be wearing gloves, blah, 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 blah. But I proved my worth, and now I consider him a wonderful colleague, but we haven't spoken in a long time. I had a cover idea about Wrigley Field. I don't know if you can see this, but it's the silhouette of the player, and all that's coming out is the glove and the ball. And I submitted the idea, and they liked it. They said, okay, it's a go. And then before I started painting, they said, time out. One of our fact checkers, and if the New Yorker does a cover, it's about baseball, it'll be at the beginning of the season in the spring or at the end of the season in the fall. And so this was at the beginning of the season, and they said, you know, in April, the ivy hasn't grown in yet at Wrigley Field. So they killed it. So they called me the next year and said, hey, we want to do that baseball cover with the ivy. And I said, well, I thought that fact checker said, you know, the ivy hasn't come in yet. And he said, oh, he doesn't work here anymore. Well, that was great. So, again, so when Alex Rodriguez signed with them, I thought, well, their pinstripes can be pinstripe suits because they're just rolling in the dough. So as he tips his hat, money falls out. Or years later, opening day, they were all old and beat up, so they all got walkers and canes and wheelchairs. As much as I don't like the Yankees, I do like this guy. And so when Derek Jeter retired, I submitted this idea. And what was great is that the Yankees organization bought this cover for him and presented it to him when he retired. So if I do have the Yankees on the cover playing anybody, it's going to be the Red Sox. Because even though the San Francisco Giants are my main team, the Red Sox are my American League team. So there's Big Pappy sliding home, and the Yankees are befuddled. And you try to design it so something happens in the O of Yorker. So there's where the ball's coming through. I have a million baseball books, and I was flipping through a book once, and I saw this image of an old game from the early 1900s where you toss beanbags into the mouth of this player. And when I saw that, I thought, I bet I could just slightly tweak each expression to be, I'm doing my job as the ump, I'm thrilled as the catcher, and I'm pissed as the batter for this called strike. And then someone contacted me, and they said, umpires signal balls and strikes with their right hand. Baseball fans. So I said, artistic license, that's what it's going to be. I don't only do baseball covers, but primarily, so here was when I was thinking, how do you golf in Manhattan? Or playing basketball. And I liken this one to, there's projects where a lot of street basketball is played, and they're famous basketball courts, and so you start in the projects with the brick buildings, and hopefully you get to Midtown with all the glass and gleam. Or this idea about ice skaters. I like the democracy of an ice rink where you can be someone who's just learning to skate, or you could be almost an Olympian. So you've got every type here. And I wanted it to create a circle. So you follow the people in the circle, and then the last two you see, it's me and my daughter helping me throw my back out as she starts to slip on the ice. I mentioned I like suspended animation, so I thought I want to do something with a skateboarder. And I thought, okay, what can I do with a skateboarder? And so I thought, well, New York has horrendous traffic. Maybe someone can leap over the traffic. And when the Summer Olympics were happening in Rio recently, it was also coinciding with the outbreak of Zika. So those are supposed to be mosquitoes, and they approved that, and then here's the finished painting. And that, a bunch of bugs there, I took a paintbrush and dipped it in ink, and then I took a piece of acetate and went to create the swarm, and I taped it onto the art, and I put it over here, so that's why all these people are looking up here, but the New Yorker put it down here. So that explains that little thing. Okay, so working with Francoise. Francoise is the best. So one time I submitted an idea that was very lame. Two women shopping, and they're wearing the exact same outfit. And Francoise said, I like the idea of mirroring imagery, but why don't you say something with it? Because you're not saying anything here. And around that time, for a brief period of time, gay marriage was legalized in California. And so I thought, well, on your wedding day, it's the most important day in your life, perhaps, and you got to have that perfect dress, and now you're going to be competing with men for that dress. So that was what this one was. And when I submit ideas, I often annotate them so I make sure they know what I'm trying to say. So I had this idea, free as a bird, and I thought, okay, birds are out flying, they have all this freedom, and dogs are stuck inside of, sweltering buildings, and there's a cat in the upper left that's very nonchalant. And Francoise said, David Remnick likes the idea of different dogs in the window. I guess I took my notes here. David likes different dogs in all windows. But she said, forget this bird idea, make it about the heat of summer. So it's called Hot Dogs, and all the dogs are panting except the cat that's chilling on the swamp cooler in the upper left. So I also thought, when the Sopranos series was coming to an end and everybody was wondering, well, what's going on with Sopranos? I thought, maybe that's right for New Yorker, because I bet a lot of New Yorker readers will also watch the Sopranos. And I was a huge fan. And I thought, okay, all these people in the Sopranos, this is the best job they're ever going to have. They're going to need therapy when this job is over. So if you've watched The Sopranos, you know that there's this psychiatrist that Tony Soprano sees, Dr. Melfi. So, Tony's the most important character. He's front and center, and those are the main characters who are all in therapy. And Francoise said, this is a great cover for Entertainment Weekly, but it doesn't look like a New Yorker cover. So how can we make it look like a New Yorker cover? So we're talking on the phone. Well, what if it was like an old silent movie and it just kind of fades out? And it's like, nope, no one's going to get this. So I had to nix this idea and just concentrate, okay, if the whole series starts with Tony Soprano in his psychologist's office, I wonder if somehow it will have that as some sort of closure. So I had this, and I called it Last Exit, which is also kind of how New Jersey's always joked about with their exits. And then it became the cover. And I'm going to finish with bummers, which are the covers that didn't run, or the inside pieces that got killed. So this cover for the Rio Olympics, and I said, you going to do anything about the Olympics? And they said, nah. And then at the last minute, they said, yes, do something about the Olympics. So this one ran, or was painted, and then the same week prior to the New Yorker coming out, The Economist had this cover. So they said, it's too similar, it's not going to run. And then when my dog book came out, Francois said, why don't you do a dog painting and maybe we can use it to coincide with your book? It's like, great, I'll paint my dog, Henry, kicking leaves. I call this Fall Harvest. And then David Remnick said, that looks like they're promoting his book. So they killed that. Or at the end of the Bush presidency, he was a lame duck. So they're all fleeing the swamp. And then I was thinking about the obesity epidemic in America. So this one is called The Pursuit of Happiness. And they were all set to run this like in a February. And then they said, in August, we're going to have a food issue. So we're going to save it for the food issue. It's like, okay. So then the issue comes out for the food and it's not on the cover. And I said, hey, I thought this was going to be the food cover. And they said, yeah, but then we thought about our advertisers. They're not going to want this on the cover. So it did run inside with an article years later. Or this one, In the Wee Small Hours. If you ever see now a standing alone image in the New Yorker, it's probably a cover that got bumped from being a cover. Or when Obama was first in the office, all the Valentines he was receiving. One year, the Mets were embroiled in the Bernie Madoff scandal, and they were supposed to be really lousy. I thought, I could do something about the Mets. And there's a famous baseball photo of a player getting a beer knocked onto his head. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have a beer knocked onto this Mets player's head. And it's really interesting how when a ball goes into the stands, people want it, and they're afraid of it simultaneously. So everybody's like, I want that ball. And so that was fun to do, and the ball was where the O of Yorker would be, and I thought, okay, if the ball's going over the fence, someone should be happy, and that's me, the Giants fan on the far left. But the Mets started off good, and it never ran. And then you Red Sox fans know that in 2004, the Red Sox not only won their first championship in almost a century, but they also swept the Yankees after being down 3-0. And when they won that last game, I thought, I bet every Red Sox fan is dancing on the grave of all the bad Yankees. Bucky Dent and Babe Ruth. And I even looked at old Grateful Dead posters to do the Dancing Dead. And this was another one of those one-day paintings. And they get it. And David Remnick likes to take the art around to various people saying, do you get this? Do you get this? I've been told. And in this case, one of the editors said, the New Yorker is going to celebrate the Red Sox beating the Yankees? So, needless to say, this did not run. Or this one was inside about the world of Martha Stewart. And I'm not really a Martha Stewart fan. So I thought, this is great. I can kind of poke fun at Martha. So, the perfectionist. So when it's said in the article that when she can't sleep at night, she gardens at night, so that's her with a flashlight in the middle on the left, or she grooms her cat, so I have her licking her cat. But they killed this one, as was this portrait of Reagan, never ran. I think it's because I showed a horse's ass. Or this one is Scalia. Or this movie review of Tree of Life. And when I went to Tiger Stadium, I kind of went overboard, so they decided not to run this. And then when bin Laden was killed, they wanted to do something about that. And this was another one of these, like, do it in 2 days. But I had to read their description of this attack and try to figure out, okay, where was the helicopter? Where was the wall? How tall was the wall? Where was the building? And apparently I got the facts wrong. And so that got killed. And I showed earlier the Halloween cover Boo with Trump, someone in a Trump mask and all the scared kids. That I had actually submitted that 2 years prior when I had both Hillary and Trump as the scariest ones, because I figured they both scared the snot out of half the population. But I submitted it too late to be a cover for that Halloween. Again, you can't have an idea too close because it won't run. And I've been trying forever to do something about our current president. So here's American Gothic, where the pitchforks through the Constitution. Or here he is with the emperor with no clothes as one of his sycophants, drops the robe and there he is. The New Yorker always does this Eustace Tilley takeoff at their anniversary issue in February. So I thought he's loving himself. Or he's moving into the Oval Office with portraits of himself. Or he's firing Big Bird by canceling funding for public television. Or he's stuck with his wall idea. And one idea I had I liked so much, someone said, why don't you just paint it? So I did paint it, but they still didn't run it, in destroying the Republican Party. And other political ideas that haven't run. When Kerry and Bush were debating, Abu Ghraib and that image was prominent, so that's the elephant in the room. Or looking at politicians and how much they remind me of NASCAR drivers, so I put all the corporate sponsors on their outfits. Or delivering low blows. I mentioned how when something newsworthy happens, you're competing with a bunch of people. So when Katrina happened, there was an email that went out, we need something, first come, first serve. So, okay, what can I do for Katrina? Okay, flooded city, New Orleans architecture, and like a clarion call from a musician on a roof, like a Louis Armstrong type. And I was too late because I'm 3 hours behind New York, and there's a wonderful illustrator named Anna Juan who lives in Spain who's 5 hours ahead, or 6 hours ahead of New York, so here's her cover. Same idea, just different execution and different time zone. Again, looking at my own life, there was a time when everybody was breastfeeding. So you go to a party and all the women are breastfeeding, so I thought, okay, I'll have the women elegantly dressed, casual as can be, and that's me in the lower left trying to get a baby bottle into an infant. And then, this is an idea, but someone had a better idea, Art Spiegelman, how to do the same idea, but he married it to the workforce. At the time, also, my wife and all her friends were knitting. So I thought, okay, you're in a hipster bar, and not only do you drink, you knit. And none of these ever ran. We go to a lot of concerts, so I thought, okay, when you go to the concert, the rocker has got a white ponytail, and everybody in the audience is wearing glasses and gray hair. And instead of Jack Daniels, they've got Metamucil and Bengay and aspirin on the speakers. And for any of you parents who have children who have heavy backpacks, this was called heavy academic load. So it's like, okay, I've got this idea coming out of the bus or in the hall of the school, or going to the playground and the kids that run wild, and there's that one kid whose parents are a little too protective. And I look at my vacation photos, like, is there anything here? So going to the Cape, it's like, okay, how about this plein air painting, someone painting the birds flying by? Or this idea I was thinking of, the hordes of people at the Louvre, and this is called Moaning Lisa. She's rolling her eyes. But the New Yorker has banned any more ideas with cell phone cameras. If it's got a cell phone camera in it, it's not going to happen. So I did use this in a different assignment. So this is done digitally. I'm now working on an iPad. So I got to use that idea. And so I'm also submitting ideas now digitally, but I still paint for them because they want paintings. And if someone's going to buy an original, they're going to buy an original painting for a cover as opposed to a sketch. So this is when the Mueller report was supposed to be released around the Academy Awards. The envelope, please. And then I was also thinking about the advent of selfies and who are the great self-portrait artists, and what if they had cameras? And then finally, one of my favorite covers, there was twice in the past 20-something years, Hanukkah and Christmas fell on the same day. So I call this mixed marriage. So Santa's lighting the menorah as the Christmas tree is in the background on the mantle mirror. And that's all. So thanks so much. And if you have any questions, that's my favorite part. So please, if you have one or more.
What?
Yeah?
Do you own the paintings or is the studio?
I own the paintings. In illustration, you license the right to use your work, and you own the work. And then a lot of them are in my flat files, and occasionally people want to purchase an original, and I probably sold, maybe half of my covers.
Working on the iPad switched that for process. I saw a time-lapse video of you putting something together and it was on the lawn.
Oh, at Dartmouth? Yeah. Well, it's much faster, and it's new for me, so it's much more fun. And with my eye disease, I can go like this on my iPad, and I can see. Unfortunately, now when I paint, I'll often be at a surface, and I want to do that. It's like, you can't do that. It's like having an art supply store right in front of me. I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. You can experiment more. I can move things around. Prior to that, I'm kind of old school. I have a little Xerox machine, and if I'm coming up with a character, I'll make it at 78% and 70% and 115% and 130% or whatever I can do, and then I'd cut them out and try different sizes. But now I'll compose, perhaps, on the iPad, print it out, and then paint it. But for the world of illustration, unfortunately, the pay is lousy. Any of you illustrators out there can confirm that, especially editorial. Just as a point of reference, in 1980, an average full-page illustration in America paid $1,500, and now if I get offered a full page, it's $1,200. Norman Rockwell could paint a cover of the Saturday Evening Post and buy a house with the painting proceeds. So it's changed, but we're not living in the era where illustration was dominant. I'm just grateful to be an applied artist so I can make a living as an artist. And one reason I think that illustrators differ from fine artists, and I notice that illustrators are very open about, here's my technique, or here's my clients, or here's who to contact. Because when you get an assignment as an illustrator, someone's saying, you're going to get paid. We want you to do this. Here's what you're going to get paid. You're getting approval. As an artist, you're hoping someone will buy it. So you're a little more proprietary about what you're going to share with other competitors. So I just find illustration to be a wonderful community. Well, to me, an illustrator is told they're going to get paid, and then they do the work, and an artist does the opposite. They do the work, and then they hope they're going to get paid. So there is that difference. But for me, as an illustrator, I want to have the same freedom to be as personal as I can be. And as an artist, you get to be totally personal. But as an illustrator, I try to make it about what I love. So that's why no one says, hey, do something about tech, because I don't like tech, So they call me, it's like, and I'm getting kind of, pigeonholed dogs, baseball, but, or politics. So I'm happy to have that distinction, and I recognize the distinction. But I think it is more about the end product. And I try to make my illustrations look like paintings. I want them to stand on the wall, but the bottom line is it has to serve the client's needs. And fine art doesn't. Fine art can be as personal as you want it to be, but the client's the most important thing. When I first started out, I told myself I have two goals. One is to do work I like, figuring if I like it, the client will. And the other was hopefully gain the respect of my peers, which I had no control over. So all I tried to do was do work I liked. And I'd say I like a quarter of the stuff I do. Oh.
So when you get an image on paper, right, I didn't understand how you did that. Do you draw them or do you
I have a printer, so I do a drawing, I scan it, take it down to the printer. Actually, my wife, Leslie, does the printing. Print it out, and then I can paint on top of it. But I don't just paint on paper, I paint on all kinds of surfaces. But for illustration, and especially the New Yorker wanting smaller covers, I use the 19 by 13 inch sheet of watercolor paper. And I can paint acrylic on it, or I can paint gouache on it, which are my primary mediums for painting on paper.
Any problem that people ever take issue with your portrayal of them?
I mean, I know someone who's an actress, and she worked on ER, and I once did a portrait of some of the characters on ER for Entertainment Weekly, and she told me one of the guys, Noah Wiley, maybe that's the actor, said, "That's what I look like?" So that's about the most I've gotten. You never meet the people, you never hear from them. Oh, wait, one exception. You guys remember Christopher Darden, one of the prosecutors in the OJ trial? I had done a portrait of him as Saint Sebastian, you know, with all the arrows in him. And he called me up and he said, "Is this Mark Erkelson?" And I thought, if you're an attorney, you probably encounter a lot of weird last names. Wouldn't you take the time to know how to pronounce it? And so he said, I heard there's a great painting I should own. And I said, well, you know, here it is. And I said, how much? And I said, $1,000. He said, how about $780? So I sold it for $780. But for the most part, you never hear from anybody, you know. You assume they see it, but you don't get any feedback. You know, just like I don't get feedback from submissions from the New Yorker, I never hear from anybody I portray, or rarely. Well, I have a dog. Walk the dog. And I take trips like this. I love what I do, and I'm addicted to it. And so as soon as I'm done with one thing, I can't wait to start the next. And sometimes it might not be the most exciting project, but I try to make it. And yeah, it's true that you burn out. What I'm burning out on right now is my 135 square foot studio. And so in about a month, we're going to knock out the wall, and I'm going to take over my 22-year-old's room, and she's going to move downstairs because she's still at home going to school. And so that is going to help my attitude a lot, to have a bigger space. But it's natural to feel like you get in a rut, and sometimes I get in a rut and I don't like what I'm doing. And it's almost like when I'm drawing something and I'm trying to get someone's face, and I can't get their face, and I can't get it. It's like, okay, start with their feet. You know, and I'm just going to work my way up until the face is the last thing I do. Because usually I start with the face, and I got to get that right. So you try to trick yourself into ways to come up with something that will make it work for you. And so that's kind of my way of dealing with it. They haven't drastically edited one, they've drastically edited many. If you remember, there's a painting of Obama, and they said, why don't you have him in the Oval Office with his predecessors? So, okay, I'll put on the right the Republicans, on the left the Democrats, and they're all looking at him. And then it comes out in the magazine, and they took out the people on the walls. And because I'm a pussy, I never asked them why. And there was one time where I did a portrait of these two people who were Muslim scholars who were disagreeing with each other, and the woman in my reference photo is holding a microphone. And then the image comes out inside, and they took out the microphone for some reason. And then there's another one where it was great. They said, okay, here's what we want. It's Ehud Barak, it's Yasser Arafat, it's the Wailing Wall, it's the Dome of the Temple Mount, it's rioting Palestinians, illustrate that. And so I did it, and I found this reference of Arafat, not Arafat, who is the guy? Ariel Sharon. And he is eating a chicken wing, and I have him holding this chicken because I thought he's just this gluttonous guy. And it comes out, and his hand's there, but there's no chicken. So they do it after the fact. And I've had other magazines that do it before the fact, which I greatly appreciate as opposed to being surprised. But it's the New Yorker. So, you may.
Having a recognizable style, I recognize your work. Anything to say about how you arrive at that, or do you sometimes reject something that's not?
Well, part of having the recognizable style, sometimes I want to get beyond it and get simpler. But it's who I am. It's like changing your walk or your voice. It's just, that's who I am. And so And it's also from what my mentor friend Pamela said, know yourself and have it come out. So the whimsy or the suspended motion or the drama, I like all that stuff. So that's part of what I do. But I also, because I want to tell stories of what hands do, I make hands smaller than they normally are. And everybody wears size 2 shoes, because I just don't like clunky feet. And so they're kind of part and parcel of what I do, and I just accept it. And one of the problems I have is when I get what I call Mr. Potato Head heads, where the head is too big, and I got to shrink it down. Because sometimes I do that caricature thing where the head is way too big. But, for better or worse, I think most recognizable illustrators, you can tell their work. And it's because it's who they are as a person that comes out visually.
I sometimes see illustrations that I think is yours, and it turns out to just be sort of, in some sense, either accidentally or intentionally or unconsciously imitating your style.
Mm-hmm.
You sometimes see that and feel that,
Only when it's Charlie Powell. Sorry. You can't help but be influenced by what you see. And when I first started out, I was so insecure that I'd have all these images in front of me. Seymour Quast does it this way, and Henry Thresher does it that way, and Milton Glaser does it this way, and Brad Holland does it that way. And I learned to be me. So maybe somebody out there is saying, I like what Mark does, and then they're going to become themselves, hopefully. But there's somebody who's doing inside stuff in the New Yorker now, so it's like, wow, that looks a lot like what I do, but they're doing it digitally. What happened with the New Yorker Inside is after doing it for 20 years, Condé Nast, the parent company, got a new creative director, and out with the old, in with the new. And aside from Barry Blitt, maybe 1 or 2 other people, a lot of the people who are working for them for the past 20-something years are no longer doing inside stuff. They want a new crop. There's like a new cartoon editor, so there's new cartoons in there. Every once in a while there's a new cover artist. Jenny Kroik, I see, is coming to speak. She's a relatively new New Yorker cover artist. I love her work. So I just accept that this can happen, but it bums me out when they get assignments that I don't get. But I'm not an art buyer, so I just can put my work out there and hope someone calls me. But I think I've been around for 25 years, and I'm kind of like that old guy. Well, if that's any more? Have I changed my style to? Yes, I definitely drastically changed my style because of the comments I got from an art director at Mother Jones magazine named Louise Kohlenbaum. When I first started out, trying to start out, I would just draw to my head, which I learned is not the best way for me to work. And I would draw these characters, and they were in my portfolio, and I saw her at Mother Jones, and she said, no one's going to hire you because your characters are too ugly and too frightening. And maybe I was angry at life or something, but so I took that to heart, and I said, okay, I'm drawing out of my head. I need to not draw out of my head. What do I love? I love the movies. So I went to some bookstores, and I bought big books with black and white photos, full-page photos of actors through the ages, because they got great faces, they have all these emotions that they portray in the movies, and the lighting's fantastic, and they became my models. So I have to do something about someone being sad, and I find a picture of Elizabeth Taylor looking sad, and I use her face, and then I pull out a Vogue magazine for a contemporary hairdo, and I put that hairdo on her and the new clothes on her, and no one knows it's Elizabeth Taylor except me. And so that became my new models. Norman Rockwell would find the citizens of his town and photograph them. I have no patience or time for doing that. I use reference material. I keep files of everything: walking, sitting, handshakes, kisses, hugs, transportation, buildings, all this stuff that I refer to. Unfortunately, I do Google image search too much now. But I learned to change my style to make it more palatable for a buying market.
Sorry to say, we just got last call from the library. So, Mark, thank you very, very much. Let's give him a big round of applause. We do have about 15 minutes out here. If you'll let Mark get to the table, if any of you would like to have books signed by him, there are books available right outside. Let's let Mark get out there, and then one more big round of applause for Mark Orkin.
Thank you.